The wind on the high mesa was a lonely thing, a constant mournful wail that scraped against the rocks and sang through the sparse pines. For Caleb Miller, it was the sound of home. He called this sprawling, unforgiving land his own, a vast kingdom of red rock and deep shadow where a man could live and die without seeing a soul. He was a mountain man in the truest sense, carved by the elements, his face a roadmap of sun and windburn, his hands calloused from years of trapping, skinning, and building. His home was a small, well-hidden cabin, a testament to his self-reliance. It was crude but sturdy, built from timber he'd felled himself and chinked with mud and moss. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke, salted venison, and old leather. Today, the loneliness felt sharper than usual. Caleb had spent the morning checking his traps, a routine as old as the mountains themselves. He was coming back, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple, when he smelled it. The scent wasn't of pine or dry earth, but something acrid and wrong. The metallic tang of blood and the sharp coppery smell of burnt wood. He froze, his hand instinctively going to the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip, the well-worn leather cool against his palm. He followed his nose, the silent hunter in him taking over. He moved with a practiced grace, his heavy boots making no sound on the dusty ground. The sun was a low, blinding glare as he crested a ridge and saw it. Below, in a small, sheltered canyon he knew well, was a scene of utter devastation. It was an Apache camp, or what was left of one. Teepees were torn open and smoldering, their hide skins blackened and smoking. Baskets and supplies were scattered, and the air was thick with the stench of violence. The silence was the most damning part. The wind still whispered, but the sounds of life, children's laughter, the low murmurs of conversation, the rustle of daily chores, were all gone. Caleb's gut tightened. He knew better than to ride into a scene like this blind. It could be a trap, a way to lure in the curious and finish the job. He dismounted his mare, a tough, sure-footed creature named Willow, and tied her to a juniper tree, whispering a soft word to her. He continued on foot, a shadow among the long shadows cast by the rocks. He moved from rock to rock, a ghost in the canyon, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. He saw the bodies first, men, women, and children. The sight was a punch to the gut. The brutality was senseless, a hallmark of the raiding parties that sometimes swept through these lands, leaving only death in their wake. His jaw was set, a grim line. He had seen his share of violence, but this was a massacre. Then he heard it, a small sound, almost swallowed by the wind. A whimper. It came from beneath a pile of smouldering hides near what used to be a central fire pit. His senses sharpened, his focus narrowing to that single, fragile sound. He crept closer, his rifle at the ready. He carefully moved the hides with the barrel of his rifle, and what he saw made him drop the weapon, his harsh exterior cracking. There, nestled together, were two boys, small and wide-eyed, their faces streaked with soot and tears. One was perhaps 3, the other a little older, maybe 5. They were clinging to the body of their mother, her stillness an unnatural contrast to their trembling. She wasn't dead. Her breathing was shallow, a faint, ragged rasp, and a dark stain was spreading across the buckskin dress on her side. Her eyes were open, filled with a primal, desperate fear. They fixed on Caleb, not with hate, but with a plea. He lowered himself to his knees, his movements slow and non-threatening. He raised his hands, palms open, a universal sign of peace. The woman's eyes were the deepest brown he had ever seen, and they spoke a language that needed no words. He saw strength in them, a will to survive that hadn't been extinguished by the fire and the blade. The younger boy, the one with the round, tear-streaked face, buried his face into his mother's shoulder, a soft sob escaping him. The older boy, his eyes hard with a fear too big for his small frame, held a tiny carved wooden horse tightly in his hand. Caleb knew what he had to do. He couldn't just leave them here to die. The raiders might return, or the vultures would find them. He looked from the woman's pleading eyes to the boys clinging to her. He was a man of the mountains, not of a family. He knew how to track game and build a shelter, but he knew nothing of nursing a wounded woman or raising children. Still, the decision was made the moment he saw them. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "I'll help." The woman's eyelids fluttered, a silent acknowledgement. He saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a fragile flame in the darkness. He carefully checked the woman's wound, noting the deep, ragged cut on her side. It was bleeding, but it didn't look like it had hit a major artery. The wound was bad, but not immediately fatal. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it to the wound, trying to stop the flow of blood. The woman winced, a soft gasp escaping her lips, but she didn't pull away. The boys watched, their eyes still wide, their fear turning into a cautious curiosity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a final blaze of glory, Caleb Miller, the lone mountain man, began the long, arduous process of saving a family that was not his own. The wind, which had once been a lonely companion, now seemed to whisper a new song. A song of two strangers bound by a terrible tragedy and an unspoken promise in the heart of the unforgiving wild. A new chapter of his solitary life had just begun. The journey back to Caleb's cabin was a slow, agonizing ordeal. He fashioned a makeshift travois from two long poles and a piece of old hide, a crude but effective way to carry the injured woman. He moved with a practiced gentleness, his large hands surprisingly deft as he lifted Naia and her children onto the contraption. The older boy, whose name Caleb would soon learn was Tarlo, clung to his mother's side, his small face a mixture of terror and determination. The younger Cale was still inconsolable, his whimpers a constant heartbreaking rhythm. The woman Naia was fading fast. Her skin was clammy, her breath a series of shallow, rattling gasps. Caleb knew he was in a race against time. The bleeding had slowed, but she was weak, her body racked with fever. He pushed Willow to a steady, deliberate pace, navigating the treacherous mountain paths with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years. He thought of his cabin, the simple, rustic place that had always been his sanctuary. Now it would be a makeshift infirmary, a fragile fortress against the harsh realities of the world. When they finally arrived, the moon was high and full, casting a silvery glow over the cabin's humble facade. The sight of his home, with its plume of smoke rising from the chimney, should have brought a sense of peace, but instead it felt charged with a new, overwhelming responsibility. He carefully carried Naia inside, the boys trailing behind him, their small moccasins making soft thuds on the dirt floor. The cabin was warm from the dying embers of the fire he'd left that morning. Caleb laid Naia on his cot, the worn buffalo hide he used as a mattress. Her eyes, which had been so full of pleading hope, were now glazed over with pain. He knelt beside her, his rough hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He cleaned her wound with a solution made from boiled water and a few drops of alcohol from his flask. She didn't cry out, just bit her lip until a thin line of red appeared. Her strength, even in this weakened state, was remarkable. The boys watched from the corner, their small forms huddled together. They didn't speak, but their eyes never left Caleb. He was a stranger, a different kind of man than they were used to, with his thick, sun-bleached beard and the smell of wood smoke and leather that clung to him. The older boy, Tarlo, was the guardian of the pair. He kept a protective arm around his younger brother, his gaze unwavering, a silent challenge and a wary question. Caleb turned his attention to them. They were hungry and scared. He placed a small bowl of venison stew on the ground between them. They didn't move at first, but the aroma was too much to resist. Tarlo nudged Cale, who hesitantly reached out and grabbed a piece of dried meat. Soon they were eating, the sound of their quiet chewing a small victory in the otherwise silent cabin. For the next few days, the cabin was a place of quiet tension and tireless effort. Caleb rarely slept. He tended to Naia's wound, changing the bandages, forcing her to drink water infused with medicinal herbs he'd gathered. Her fever raged and broke, a cycle of life and death that kept him on edge. The boys, Taylor and Cale, slowly began to thaw. They watched him, their curiosity overcoming their fear. They saw him chop wood, skin a rabbit, and mend a saddle. They saw the care he took with their mother, the way his rough hands were gentle as he tended to her. One evening, Tarlo approached him. He held out the small carved wooden horse he'd been clutching. It was a simple toy, but to Caleb it was a profound gesture. Talo didn't speak the language, but his eyes said everything. "Thank you." Caleb took the horse, his fingers wrapping around the smooth wood. He nodded, a silent bond forming between them. From that moment on, Talo began to help, bringing in small pieces of kindling for the fire, watching Kale so Caleb could tend to his mother. Naia's fever finally broke on the 4th day. She woke, her eyes clear, the pain in them replaced by a deep, weary gratitude. She managed a few words, her voice a dry whisper. "Ahehi," she said, the Apache word for thank you. Caleb simply nodded. "We're safe here," he said, his voice rough. She looked at her sons, and a new wave of emotion, raw and overwhelming, washed over her face. Relief. She reached out, her hand trembling, and took Talo's hand. The little boy leaned into her, finally letting go of the tension he'd held for days. The cabin, once a symbol of Caleb's solitary existence, was now filled with the presence of 3 other souls. The air was different. It was no longer just his. It held the faint scent of Apache herbs, the rustle of 2 boys settling down for the night, and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of a woman on the mend. A fragile bond had been forged in the fire of tragedy, and Caleb, the man who needed no one, found himself needing them more than he ever could have imagined. As Naia's strength returned, so did her quiet determination. She spent her days watching Caleb, observing his every move. She saw the way he moved with the land, his knowledge of the mountains as deep and intimate as her own people's. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He provided for them without question, hunting and trapping to ensure they had food, gathering wood to keep the fire burning. He didn't intrude, but he was always there, a silent guardian. Communication was a slow, deliberate process. Naia spoke a few words of English, learned from trading posts on the outskirts of her tribe's lands, and Caleb knew some common Apache terms from years of peaceful coexistence with a nearby band. But mostly, they communicated through gestures, shared glances, and an understanding that transcended language. They were 2 people from different worlds, now bound by a shared, traumatic experience. One afternoon, Naia was well enough to sit up by the fire. She took a piece of rawhide and a sharp stone and began to work, her hands moving with purpose. Talo and Kale watched her, their faces finally showing some of the joy they had lost. She was making new moccasins for the boys, their old ones torn and worn from the journey. Caleb watched her, fascinated by the way she worked, her movements fluid and practiced. He had never seen a woman do such work with such grace. He brought her a small pot of water, and she looked up, her eyes meeting his. She offered a small, grateful smile. "You are a good man, Hawk," she said, using the name he was known by among the tribes. Caleb was surprised she knew the name. "It is what it is," he grumbled, his cheeks feeling warm. He wasn't used to praise. "You need to rest." "My people, we are strong," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My sons must be strong." She looked at her boys, her face filled with fierce love. They need their mother. Caleb understood. He saw the fire in her eyes, the resolve that had kept her alive. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior in her own right. This wasn't about him helping her. It was about her rebuilding her life, no matter the cost. The cabin began to change. Naia, with her quiet efficiency, took charge of the daily tasks. She showed Caleb how to make a poultice from crushed herbs for his cuts, and she taught Talo how to grind corn into flour. Kale, the youngest, slowly began to emerge from his shell. He would follow Caleb around, his small hand sometimes reaching out to touch the fabric of his worn buckskin jacket. Caleb, who had always been a man of solitude, found himself enjoying the company, the small noises of a family filling the silence of his home. One evening, after the boys were asleep, Naia sat by the fire, her head tilted, looking up at the stars through the smoke hole in the roof. "We are of the wind," she said, her voice a whisper. "We move with the seasons. We are not meant to stay in one place." Caleb, whittling a piece of wood into a new handle for his axe, paused. "The mountains are my home," he said simply. "They don't move." She turned her head, her gaze thoughtful. "My people, they are gone." She said the word with a finality that hit Caleb hard. It was the first time she had directly spoken of the massacre. I am alone. How, you are not alone, Caleb said, the words feeling clumsy and foreign on his tongue. He gestured to the two sleeping boys. You have your sons. And you, she added, her eyes holding his. You saved us. We are in your debt. There is no debt, Caleb said, putting his knife and wood down. I did what any man would do. Not every man, she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. Some men would have left us to die. You stayed. A long silence settled between them, filled with the crackling of the fire and the soft breaths of the sleeping children. They were two different people, with different histories and different futures, yet for this moment, in this isolated cabin, they were a family. Naia felt a pull she hadn't expected. This mountain man, with his rough hands and quiet strength, was not her enemy. He was her unexpected sanctuary. And Caleb, watching the firelight dance across her face, felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a feeling he hadn't known he was missing. He didn't know what the future held. He only knew that for now, this fragile, newfound family was his to protect, and he would do so with every ounce of strength he possessed. The unspoken language of trust had begun to build a bridge between them, one he knew they would need to cross together. The peace was a fragile thing, easily shattered. A week into their new life, a storm rolled in from the west, blanketing the mountains in a thick, wet snow that trapped them inside the cabin. The confinement was a test of their new dynamic. The boys, full of pent-up energy, were restless, and Naia, though her physical wounds were healing, was still burdened by the unseen wounds of her grief. Caleb found himself caught in the middle. He was used to the solitude of a long winter, but the cabin now felt too small, too crowded. He found himself retreating into himself, a habit of a lifetime. He would sit for hours, mending his gear or sharpening his knives, a silent presence in the corner of the room. Naia noticed, of course. Her quiet observation was a skill born of survival. One afternoon, she came and sat beside him. He flinched, not used to the closeness. You are like the bear in winter, she said softly. You hide in your cave. He grunted, not looking up from the leather strap he was mending, just thinking. What do you think of? She pressed. Of the land? Of the sky? Of the ghosts? The last word made him freeze. He looked at her, his eyes hard. There are no ghosts here. She held his gaze, her dark eyes penetrating. We all have them, Hawk. The people who are gone. The things we wish we could change. She gestured to the boys who were playing a quiet game with carved animal figures. The men who came. They are the ghosts now. Caleb's jaw tightened. Don't talk about it, he said, his voice a low command. We must, she insisted, her voice still a whisper. To be free, we must speak of the shadows. She took a deep breath. They were Ute raiders. They had no honor. They came for our horses, our supplies. They killed without reason. A single tear tracked a clean path through the soot on her cheek. My husband. He fought. He died so his sons could live. The words were like a blow to Caleb. He had assumed, but he hadn't known. The weight of her loss was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak she wore. He finally looked at her, at the raw grief in her eyes. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling completely inadequate. Sorry is a useless word, she said, shaking her head. It does not bring them back. But you gave my sons a future. You gave me time. Caleb felt a strange mixture of humility and anger, the senselessness of it all, the brutal cruelty of man against man. He had his own ghosts, of a life he had left behind, a family he had lost. He had run from them, building his solitary existence as a wall against the pain. But seeing Naia face her past with such courage, it made his own seem like a coward's retreat. He found himself telling her, for the first time in years, a part of his story, of a life in a town far away, a family torn apart by sickness and bad luck. He spoke of his father, a hard man who had lost everything, and of the day he left, walking away from it all and never looking back. He was a wanderer, a man who belonged to the mountains because he belonged nowhere else. Naia listened, her expression compassionate and understanding. She didn't offer platitudes or empty words of comfort. She simply listened. And in that listening, in the quiet intimacy of the snowbound cabin, a new level of trust was forged. They were no longer just a protector and the protected. They were two people with broken pasts, finding a common ground in the present. The storm raged outside, a wild symphony of wind and snow, but inside the cabin the air was still and warm. The shadows of their pasts had been acknowledged, and for the first time they didn't feel so heavy. They had each other's silent, shared understanding. And as the night deepened, Caleb found himself thinking not of the ghosts that haunted him, but of the woman who was helping him finally face them. The snowbound weeks that followed created a new rhythm for the small family. With the outside world, a white expanse of silence, the cabin became their entire universe. The days took on a comfortable, predictable pattern. Caleb would tend to his traps close to the cabin, ensuring they had enough food. He taught Tallow how to set small snares for rabbits and squirrels, and the boy, a quick and eager student, took to it with pride. Kyle, meanwhile, was Caleb's constant shadow, his small feet pattering after him as he chopped wood or checked the smokehouse. Naia spent her time making the cabin feel more like a home. She wove blankets from old salvaged hides and crafted new cooking tools. She taught the boys songs from her people, her voice a low melodic sound that filled the small space with a sense of peace. She also began to teach Caleb some basic Apache words. He was a slow learner, but he listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He learned the words for mother, Shiye, son, Shichashe, and home, Hughan. It was a simple vocabulary, but each word was a bridge, a step closer to understanding. One evening, as Caleb was cleaning his rifle, Naia came and sat by his side. "You have good hands," she said, watching him work. "They are strong, but gentle." He looked at her, surprised. "They are a trapper's hands, nothing more." "No," she insisted, her eyes soft. "They are the hands that saved my sons. That is a different kind of strength." She paused, her gaze dropping to the worn wood of his floor. "My husband. His hands were like that. Strong. He taught our sons to hunt, to be warriors." Caleb felt a pang of something he couldn't name, a mixture of respect and a strange, quiet jealousy. He was a stand-in, a temporary replacement for the man she had lost. He was just a mountain man, a provider. He couldn't teach them the way of her people, the songs, the stories, the language. "I can teach them to survive out here," he said, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "To hunt and to track. It's a different world." "It is," she agreed. "But it is their world too. They need both." She looked at him, a silent question in her eyes. "My people. We have ceremonies for the children, for the harvest, for the sun. I want to teach them these things." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He didn't understand her culture. He had always seen it from a distance, a separate world with its own rules and traditions. He had no right to be a part of it, and he didn't know if he wanted to. But then he looked at Tallow, his small body curled up by the fire, a peaceful look on his face he hadn't seen a month ago. He looked at Kyle, who had taken to falling asleep with his hand in Caleb's. He couldn't deny them a connection to their heritage. "I will help," he said, the words feeling heavy but right. "Whatever you need." A genuine smile, the first he had truly seen, lit up Naia's face. It was a radiant thing, a burst of sunlight in the dim cabin. "Ah-he-he," she whispered, her gratitude a palpable thing. The next day, Naia began to tell the boys a story. She didn't speak in English, but in her native tongue her voice filled with a melodic rise and fall. She spoke of the white-painted woman, the creator goddess of her people, and of the sacred mountains. Caleb watched, an outsider looking in, but he was fascinated. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The story was a gift, a thread of hope woven into the fabric of her grief. He was witnessing her resilience, the way she was keeping her culture alive, even in this isolated place. And as the days turned into weeks, Caleb realized that he wasn't just providing for them. He was a part of their story now. The rhythm of his life had changed, no longer a solitary beat, but a harmonious song with a woman and her two sons. He was a trapper, a hunter, a mountain man. But now he was also something else. He was a protector, a teacher, a quiet companion. He was part of a family, and it was a feeling he didn't realize he had been yearning for. The snow began to melt, a slow, grudging retreat that revealed a world of mud and brown earth beneath. The mountains came alive again, with the sounds of rushing water and the first chirps of birds. But with the changing of the seasons came a new kind of tension. They couldn't stay in the cabin forever. Naia was growing stronger, and the boys were restless. It was time to make a plan. They were sitting around the fire one evening, the air filled with the scent of pine and freshly cooked venison, when Naia brought it up. "We must go soon," she said, her voice low. "My people, they will be looking for me. For us." Caleb's gut clenched. He hadn't considered this. He had only thought of the here and now, of their survival in the mountains. "Do you know where they are?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, the bands move. But there are places, traditional grounds. We must go there. We will find them." The idea of leaving filled Caleb with a strange anxiety. This cabin, this life, had become his. He had found a new kind of purpose here, a feeling of belonging. The thought of losing it, of returning to his solitary existence, was a cold, unwelcome dread. But he couldn't deny her this. It was her right, her need, to return to her people. "We can't go yet," he said. "The passes are still dangerous, and we need supplies." She nodded in agreement. "I can help. I can make things to trade." She held up a small, intricately woven basket she had been working on. "My mother taught me. These bring good price at the trading post." The mention of a trading post brought a new wave of caution. The nearest one was a 3-day ride. It was a place full of men, miners, trappers, outlaws, men who would not be kind to a man traveling with an Apache woman and her 2 sons. "It's not safe," he said, his voice hard. "You and the boys stay here. I'll go alone." Naia's face hardened. "No, my sons, they need to see the world, not just this cabin. They need to see that there is more than just this place." She looked at him, her eyes holding his. "And I go with you. I am not a helpless woman." He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen the day he found her. She was right. He couldn't keep them hidden away forever. But the thought of a confrontation, of someone hurting them, made his blood run cold. He was a fighter, a man who had survived by his own strength, but he was not a warrior for a family. He had no one to protect but himself. This was new and terrifying. They began to prepare. Naia fashioned several more baskets and some beautifully decorated leather pouches. Caleb spent his days salting more meat, preparing extra ammunition, and mending his gear. He taught Tallow how to load a pistol and how to use a sling. And he showed Cale how to identify medicinal plants. He was teaching them to be strong, to be self-sufficient, just as his own father had taught him. He was a mountain man, but he was also a father now in all but name. One evening, Tallow found a small, smooth stone shaped like an arrowhead. He brought it to Caleb, his eyes shining with pride. "Look," he said in his native tongue, "my father." Caleb looked at the stone, then at the boy. Tallow had never spoken of his father before. The ghost of the man who had died to save his family was always present, a silent, unseen figure in their lives. Caleb felt a lump in his throat. He was a father to this boy, but he was not his father. He was a replacement, a temporary shadow in a life that was not his own. He took the stone, his fingers wrapping around the smooth surface. "He was a good man," he said, the words feeling true. "He was very brave." Tallow nodded, a small sad smile on his face. He reached out and took Cale's hand, holding it tight. The 2 boys, who had survived so much, were a testament to their father's sacrifice. And Caleb, watching them, knew that he had to be just as brave. He had to face the world with all its dangers and its prejudices to ensure they had a future. He had no choice. He was a protector now, and that was a burden he would gladly bear. The day they left was a beautiful one, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and the sun felt warm on their faces. The cabin, their temporary sanctuary, looked smaller and more rustic as they rode away. For Caleb, it felt like leaving a part of himself behind. He had found a new life here, a purpose, and now he was riding toward a future filled with unknowns. He rode at the head of their small group, his rifle resting across the saddle. Naia rode Willow with Cale in front of her, his small arms wrapped around her waist. Talo rode his own horse, a sturdy Mustang Caleb had caught and tamed, his back straight, his eyes scanning the horizon with the focused attention of a seasoned tracker. The first 2 days were uneventful. They followed a winding river, their path hidden by the thick woods. The journey was slow, a careful trek through the untamed wilderness. They moved with a shared sense of purpose, a silent rhythm that had developed between them. Naia pointed out different plants and animals, teaching the boys the Apache names for them. Caleb, in turn, showed them how to read the landscape, how to find the path of a deer or the fresh tracks of a bear. As they got closer to the plains, the landscape began to change. The thick forests gave way to rolling hills and then to flat, endless plains. The air grew warmer, and the wind, once a constant companion, was now a hot, dry breath that kicked up dust. Caleb felt a sense of unease. They were no longer hidden by the mountains. They were exposed, vulnerable. On the third day, as they were nearing the trading post, they saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. Caleb immediately pulled them to a stop. "Hide," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Behind those rocks. Now." He dismounted, his rifle in his hands, his eyes narrowed, watching the approaching dust cloud. He couldn't tell if it was a group of riders or just a small herd of wild horses. He held his breath, his heart pounding a steady, hard rhythm in his chest. The riders were coming fast, their forms gradually taking shape through the haze. There were 5 of them. They were armed, and they were not riding like travelers. They were riding with a purpose, with a recklessness that spoke of trouble. Caleb recognized the look of them. They were a mixed bag of misfits and outlaws, the kind of men who preyed on the weak and the isolated. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He wasn't afraid for himself. He had faced down men like this before, and won. But he had never had a family to protect. The stakes were higher now. He moved silently, taking cover behind a large boulder, his rifle trained on the approaching riders. They were getting closer now. He could hear their voices, loud and boisterous. He saw the glint of steel in the sun, the worn leather of their saddlebags. They were heading for the trading post. They were looking for trouble, and they were going to find it. He waited, holding his breath, hoping they would pass them by, not notice their small hidden camp. The sound of hooves was a thunderous rumble now, the dust a thick, suffocating cloud. He could see their faces, hard and weathered, their eyes filled with a predatory glint. One of the riders, a stocky man with a drooping mustache, reined in his horse. He pointed to the tracks they had left, the hoofprints of 2 horses and a crude travois. Caleb knew he had been seen. The man yelled something to his companions, a loud, vulgar laugh escaping his lips. They were no longer just passing by. They were hunting. Caleb's heart pounded. He knew he had to act. He couldn't let them get close. He had to be the hunter, not the hunted. He had to be a warrior for a family that was not his own. Caleb's instincts took over. He raised his rifle, took a deep breath, and fired a warning shot. The crack of the rifle echoed across the plains, sharp and clear. The riders, surprised by the sound, reined in their horses, their laughter dying in their throats. "Keep riding," Caleb yelled, his voice rough and commanding. "There ain't nothing for you here." The stocky man with the mustache laughed again. "Well now, what have we here? A mountain man with a soft spot for some company." His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the rocks. "We saw your tracks, boy, and we ain't leaving without what's yours." "I said keep moving," Caleb repeated, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Last warning." The man, clearly not accustomed to being threatened, pulled out his own pistol. "You're a brave fool," he sneered, "but not a smart one." Caleb didn't wait for him to finish. He fired again, a quick, precise shot that hit the man's pistol, sending it flying from his hand. The man howled in pain and surprise, his hand clutched to his now bleeding palm. The other riders, realizing this wasn't just a bluff, raised their weapons. A small sound came from behind Caleb, a soft, worried cry from one of the boys. He couldn't risk a full-blown gunfight. He had to end this, and he had to do it now. He stepped out from behind the boulder, his rifle still trained on the group. He was a large man, his form imposing, and his face, hardened by years of solitude, was a mask of cold fury. "I'm not asking again," he said, his voice a low growl. "Leave. Now." The men looked at each other, a flicker of hesitation in their eyes. They had expected an easy target, a lone trapper. They hadn't expected a man who was willing to fight to the death. The leader, his hand still bleeding, was a man who knew when to cut his losses. He cursed, spat on the ground, and turned his horse. "He ain't worth it," he said to his men, his voice low and full of venom. "Let's go." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and the silence of the plains in their wake. Caleb watched them go, his heart still pounding in his chest. He stood there for a long time, his body tense, his rifle ready. It was only when they were a distant speck on the horizon that he let out a long, shuddering breath. He walked back to the rocks, his legs feeling weak. He found Naia and the boys huddled together, their faces pale with fear. Naia's eyes were filled with a mixture of terror and awe. "You are a dangerous man," she said, her voice a whisper. "I do what I have to," he said, his voice still hoarse. He knelt and pulled the boys into a tight embrace. Talo, who had been so brave, was trembling. Kyle was crying silently, his face buried in Caleb's chest. He held them, his large hands stroking their backs, a silent comfort. Naia, who had always been so strong, reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. It was a gesture of solidarity, of gratitude and something more. In that moment, surrounded by the vast, unforgiving landscape, a new understanding had been forged. He was their protector, and they were his. The fear in her eyes was a reflection of the fear in his own heart. The price of survival was not just skill, but an endless, vigilant watch. It was a burden, but it was a burden he was no longer carrying alone. They stayed put for the rest of the day, waiting for the sun to set before they moved on. The silence of the plains, which had once felt so peaceful, now felt full of hidden threats. They knew they were being watched. The men they had faced today were a warning. The world was a dangerous place, and they were a small, vulnerable family. As they rode on, the moon a silver crescent in the sky, Caleb knew that the journey to find Naia's people was more than just a trip. It was a test of their courage, their resilience, and the fragile bonds they had forged. The mountains had been his fortress, but now he had to be their shield. The trading post was a small, dusty collection of buildings nestled by a winding creek. It was a chaotic symphony of sights and sounds, the smell of fresh-cut timber mingling with the odor of stale whiskey, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the low murmurs of men haggling over pelts. Caleb felt a familiar sense of unease. He was a man of the wild, not of crowded places. He rode in first, his posture alert, his eyes scanning the crowd. He led Naia and the boys to a secluded area behind the main building near the creek, where they would be out of sight. He dismounted and turned to Naia. "Stay here," he said, his voice low. "Don't talk to anyone. I'll get the supplies." She nodded, her expression serious. She knew the dangers as well as he did. The boys were wide-eyed, taking in the strange new world of the trading post. Cale was a bundle of nervous energy, while Talo's face was a mask of stoic observation. Caleb walked to the main building, a large log structure with a sign that read, "Kane's General Store." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of leather, tobacco, and flour. It was a hive of activity, with men of all kinds, grizzled trappers, clean-shaven merchants, and a few rough-looking cowboys. The general store was run by a man named Elias, a barrel-chested man with a kind face and a booming laugh. He and Caleb had traded for years. "Caleb Miller, you old hermit!" Elias boomed, a wide grin on his face. "Haven't seen you since last fall. Figured the winter got you." "It's a big country, Elias," Caleb said, his voice even. "I came for supplies." "I got everything you need and a few things you don't know you need yet," Elias laughed. He eyed Caleb's trapper bag. "Any good pelts this year?" Caleb pulled out a few top-grade beaver pelts. "The best." Elias examined them, his eyes gleaming. He named a price, a fair one, and the two men began to trade. As they talked, Caleb kept a lookout. He saw the men he had confronted the day before. They were sitting at a table outside, their heads together, their eyes on the entrance of the store. They hadn't forgotten the confrontation, and they were looking for revenge. He finished the trade quickly, his mind racing. He got flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, and a few lengths of cloth for Naia and the boys. As he was paying, he noticed something in Elias's eyes, a flicker of concern. "Heard you had a run-in with a few of Cain's boys," Elias said, his voice low. "They had it coming," Caleb said gruffly. "They're a bad lot, Caleb," Elias warned, "especially their leader, a man named Red Jack. He holds a grudge. You'd best be careful." Caleb nodded. "I always am." He finished his business and left the store, his senses on high alert. He walked to the back of the trading post, the bundles of supplies heavy in his arms. He found Naia and the boys waiting, their faces a mixture of relief and fear. "We have to go," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." He didn't explain. He didn't have to. Naia saw the urgency in his eyes and knew. They mounted their horses quickly, their movements silent and practiced. They rode away from the trading post, back into the vast, open plains. As they rode, Caleb looked back. He saw the flash of movement, the dark forms of the men on the horizon. They were coming for him, and they were bringing more men. Naia, seeing his grave expression, reached out and put her hand on his arm. It was a simple yet profound gesture. It wasn't a question but a statement. "I am with you." He looked at her, then at the boys. The journey was not over. It had only just begun. The mountains were behind them, a distant memory. Now they were on their own, a small family in a vast and dangerous world. They were not just running from a threat, they were running toward a future that was uncertain, but one they would face together. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins, his jaw set. He was no longer just a man surviving. He was a man fighting for the ones he loved, and that was a battle he was prepared to win, no matter the cost. The sun was a searing orb in the sky, beating down on the endless open plains. The dust kicked up by their horses settled on their clothes, their faces, and in their throats. Caleb, Naia, and the boys were no longer traveling in a straight line. Caleb was using every bit of his tracking and evasion knowledge, leading them on a winding path, doubling back and circling to confuse their pursuers. He knew the land, but this was a different kind of hunt. This was for their lives. He would stop often, dismounting and dropping to a knee, his ear to the ground, listening. The vibration of approaching riders, a faint sound carried through the earth. He was a shadow now, a ghost moving through the land he called home. But this time he was not alone. The weight of this responsibility was a physical thing, a constant pressure in his chest. Naia rode silently beside him, her face a mask of weary determination. She understood the gravity of their situation. She watched Caleb, a newfound respect in her eyes. He was no longer just the man who had saved them. He was a protector, a warrior. He was a force to be reckoned with. The boys too were learning to be silent, to ride for hours without complaint. They were children of the wild, and they were adapting with a speed that both astonished and saddened Caleb. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent, Caleb found a small hidden cave in a cluster of jagged rocks. It was a perfect place to hide. He led them inside, the cool air a welcome relief from the heat. They dismounted, their horses' sides heaving. The boys immediately collapsed, their small bodies exhausted from the long ride. Caleb stood at the mouth of the cave, his rifle in his hands, his eyes on the horizon. Naia came and stood beside him, her gaze following his. "They are close?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "Too close," he said, his jaw tight. "They're good trackers." She was quiet for a moment. "They will not stop. They are men with no hearts. They will not rest until they find us." He looked at her face smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle. She was still beautiful. She was a vision of strength, a living testament to resilience. "I won't let them get you," he said, the words a fierce vow. "We are a family now," she said, her voice soft but firm. "If you fall, we fight together." He looked at her, at the raw courage in her eyes, and a wave of emotion, raw and overwhelming, washed over him. He was not alone. This was his family. This was his fight. He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was rough but warm. It was a silent promise, a bond sealed not with words, but with a shared sense of purpose. As the sun set, they ate a meager dinner of dried venison and water. The boys were asleep, their small forms huddled together. Caleb and Naia sat by the fire, their silence a comfortable blanket. He began to tell her stories of his life in the mountains, of the animals he had seen, the secrets of the land. She in turn told him stories of her people, of the legends and traditions passed down from generation to generation. They were two different people, from two different worlds, but they were learning to speak the same language, the language of a family forged in fire and bound by a shared desire to survive. As the night deepened, Caleb felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He was on the run, a target of dangerous men, but he had a family now. And he would fight for them with every last breath. The next day they continued their desperate flight. Caleb led them through a maze of deep canyons and narrow ravines, places so remote that few men ever ventured there. He knew these parts of the country like the back of his hand, but he also knew that their pursuers were relentless. They were getting closer. He could feel it in his bones. They came to a deep gorge, a chasm that stretched for 100 yards. It was a dead end. Caleb knew of no way across, no bridge, no narrow path. He was a man of the mountains, but this was a barrier he couldn't cross. Naia came and stood beside him, her eyes scanning the gorge. "We are trapped," she said, her voice a low whisper. Caleb's heart sank. He had run out of options. The canyon was a natural fortress, a place to make a stand. But he was one man against a gang of ruthless killers. He couldn't win. He would die, and they would be left alone. Vulnerable. He turned to her, a grim expression on his face. "This is it," he said, his voice rough. "I'll make a stand. You and the boys, you hide. I'll buy you time." "No," she said, her voice firm. "We fight together." She looked at him, her eyes holding his. "Remember what I said. We are a family." He looked at her, at the fierce loyalty in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't leave them. But he also knew he couldn't win this fight. Not without a miracle. Then Tallow, who had been standing silently, watching the chasm, pointed to a small, narrow ledge far below. "Look," he said, his voice a whisper. "The bridge." Caleb's eyes followed the boy's pointing finger. There, hidden from view, was a natural rock arch, a narrow, treacherous bridge that stretched across the gorge. It was barely wide enough for a man, let alone a horse. It was a suicide mission, but it was their only chance. He looked at Naia, and her eyes held the same thought. It was a leap of faith. He took a deep breath. "It's dangerous," he said. "One wrong step—" "We must try," she said. "We cannot stay here." He nodded. He had no other choice. He led them down a steep, treacherous path, his heart in his throat. The descent was slow and painstaking. One slip and they would all tumble to their deaths. He went first, his feet testing every foothold, his hands gripping the jagged rocks. Naia followed, holding Cale close, her face pale but determined. Tallow, brave and sure-footed, followed his mother. The natural bridge was a narrow, terrifying thing. The wind howled through the chasm, a deafening sound that made the ground beneath their feet tremble. Caleb went first, his heart pounding in his chest. He took slow, deliberate steps, his eyes fixed on the other side. The drop was a sheer, dizzying plunge. He was so close. He was halfway across when he heard it, the sound of hooves. The men were at the edge of the chasm now, their voices a triumphant roar. They had found them. "Hurry!" he yelled, his voice a frantic plea. Naia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the boy's hands and began to run, her feet barely touching the ground. She was a vision of speed and grace, a mother running for her children's lives. Caleb turned, his rifle raised, ready to make his last stand. But the men were still on the other side, and they were hesitating. They knew the bridge was a death trap. They were looking for another way around. He had bought them time. He waited, his heart pounding, as Naia and the boys made it to the other side. They were safe. He turned and ran across the bridge, his feet flying. He reached the other side, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He turned to look back and he saw them. The men, now at the other side of the gorge. They were cursing, their faces a mixture of fury and frustration. They had been outsmarted. They would not follow. He turned back to Naia and the boys, a sense of triumph and relief flooding him. He had faced his ghosts and he had won. He had protected his family. He had taken a leap of faith, and they had landed safely on the other side. The journey was not over, but they had overcome the greatest obstacle yet. The gorge was behind them, a chasm of fear they had successfully crossed. The rest of the journey was calmer, a slow, methodical trek across the plains. They had outrun their pursuers, but they were still on their guard. They were a small, vulnerable family in a vast, dangerous world. They rode for another week, moving south, following the sun. The landscape grew softer, the grass greener. The dry plains gave way to rolling hills, and then to a sprawling river valley. This was a new land, a new world, a place of hope and possibility. They set up a temporary camp by a small, secluded stream. The water was cool and clear, a balm for their weary bodies. The air was filled with the sounds of insects and the rustle of leaves. It was a moment of respite, a chance to rest and to heal. Caleb built a small fire, and they sat around it, their bodies finally at peace. Naia took out a small piece of leather and a few pieces of sinew. She began to mend the boys' clothes, her hands moving with quiet purpose. Tallow and Kale, finally able to be children again, ran and played by the stream. Their laughter a beautiful sound in the silence. Caleb watched them, his heart swelling with a feeling he couldn't name. He had been a solitary man for so long. The silence had been a comfort, a shield against a world that had hurt him. But now he saw that silence for what it was. It was an absence, a void. And these three people, this small improbable family, had filled that void with a sense of purpose and a feeling of belonging. Naia, without looking up, said, "You are a good man, Hawk. You saved us." "I did what I had to," he said, his voice gruff. "Any man would." "No," she said, her voice soft. "Many men would not. They would have left us. They would have seen a woman of my people, and her sons, and they would have turned their backs. But you did not." He was quiet for a moment. He had never considered it that way. He had simply acted on instinct, on a primal need to protect the helpless. But she was right. Prejudice ran deep in this land. It was a poison that corrupted men's hearts. He had defied that prejudice without even knowing it. He looked at her, at the firelight dancing in her eyes, and he felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. He had no words for the feeling, but he knew what it was. It was love. Not a fleeting romantic love, but something deeper, something more profound. It was the love of a man for his family. He reached out and took her hand. "You and the boys. You are my family now," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I will protect you with my life." She looked at him, a silent, beautiful smile on her face. She didn't have to say anything. Her eyes said it all. She had been searching for a place to belong, for a sanctuary. And she had found it, in the most unlikely of places, with the most unlikely of men. They sat there for a long time, their hands clasped, the fire a warm, comforting presence. The boys were asleep now, their small bodies a testament to the peace they had found. They were a family forged in fire and bound by a promise to be a shelter for each other, a rock in a stormy world. They had found their sanctuary, and it was in each other's hearts. The journey continued, but the sense of urgency had faded, replaced by a cautious optimism. They were still moving toward a destination, but now they were not just running from a threat. They were moving toward a new life, a new beginning. They were now in a different land, a place where the sun was warmer and the nights were filled with the sound of crickets and the scent of sage. The landscape was new to Caleb, but Naia knew it well. This was her people's land. She pointed out sacred places, places of power and of history. She told him stories of her people's ancestors, of the warriors and the healers, of the artists and the storytellers. Caleb listened, his mind open. He was learning a new culture, a new way of seeing the world. He was no longer just a trapper, a man of the mountains. He was a student, a man learning to be a part of a new world. He was learning to be a part of her world. One evening, as they were sitting around the fire, Naia took a piece of rawhide and a few beads. She began to work, her hands moving with a practiced grace. She was making something, a beautiful, intricate design. "What is that?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "It is a gift," she said, "for my sons. It is a symbol of our new life. The colors, they represent the sky, the earth, and the fire that has kept us safe." He watched her work, her face serene, a small, peaceful smile on her lips. He saw the firelight dancing on her face, and he felt a pull he couldn't resist. He was falling in love with this woman, with her strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. He was falling in love with the mother of his newfound family. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers tangling with hers. She looked up, surprised, her eyes wide. "Naia," he said, his voice a low rumble, I don't want to go back." She was quiet for a moment. "Where are we going, Hawk?" she asked. "We have no home now. My people are gone." "We will make a new one," he said. "Here, in this land. I will build you a house. I will build us a home." A single tear tracked a clean path down her face. "You would do this for us?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "I would do anything for you," he said, "and for the boys. They are my sons now. They are my family." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of gratitude, of love, of a future filled with hope. It was a new beginning, a promise made in the quiet of the night, under the vast, starry sky. They were a family, and they were building a home, a life, a future, together. The whispers of a new life had begun. The serenity of their journey was shattered by a new and unexpected conflict. They were nearing what Naia called the Four Peaks, a sacred place for her people, when they came across a small group of white settlers. They were a family, a man, a woman, and a young girl, their wagon broken down, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Caleb, ever the protector, rode to them. "You need help?" he asked, his voice low and gruff. The man, his face a mixture of relief and suspicion, nodded. "Our wagon wheel broke," he said, his eyes darting to Naia and the boys. "And we're out of water. We've been here for 2 days." Caleb dismounted. He was a skilled craftsman, and he knew he could fix the wheel, but he was also a man who knew the dangers of this world. He was traveling with a family of Apache. This would be a test. Naia, sensing his hesitation, rode up beside him. "We can help them," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It is the right thing to do." He nodded, and together they worked to help the family. Caleb fixed the wheel, and Naia found a hidden spring, a place of clean, clear water. The settler's family, initially wary, began to thaw. The woman, whose name was Sarah, was grateful for the water, and the young girl Clara was fascinated by the boys, by their quiet dignity and their beautiful moccasins. But the peace was shattered when the man, a proud and stubborn man named Thomas, saw the small beaded pouch Naia had made. "You're a heathen," he said, his voice full of contempt. "A savage." The words were a blow, a sharp, bitter reminder of the prejudice they faced. Naia's face remained impassive, but Caleb saw the pain in her eyes. He stepped in front of her, his body a shield. "Watch your tongue, sir," he said, his voice a low growl. "This woman and her sons saved your life." "I would rather die than be saved by a savage," the man spat, his face red with fury. Caleb's hand instinctively went to his pistol, but Naia put her hand on his arm, a gentle, restraining touch. "No," she said, her voice a whisper. "He is not worth it." She was right. Violence would only lead to more violence. He took a deep breath, and he backed down. He finished his work on the wheel, and he helped them load their supplies. They mounted their horses, and they rode away, leaving the family behind. The encounter was a stark reminder of the world they were in. They were a mixed family, and they would always be an anomaly, a target of hate and suspicion. The world would not accept them easily. That night, as they sat around the fire, Naia was quiet. Her face was grim, her eyes filled with a sadness that went beyond the day's encounter. "My people, they do not trust the white man," she said. "And the white man, he does not trust us. We are different," Caleb said, his voice low. "We will make our own path. We will not be defined by their hatred." She looked at him, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "I hope you are right," she said. The storm of conflict had passed, but it had left a mark. It was a reminder that the world was a dangerous place and that their greatest challenge was not just survival, but acceptance. They were a family, and they were fighting for a future, but they were also fighting for a place in a world that did not want them. It was a heavy burden, but it was a burden they would bear together. The journey continued, and with each passing day, the trust between Caleb and Naia deepened. The encounter with the settlers had been a harsh lesson, but it had also solidified their bond. They were a team, a partnership. They faced the world together, and their shared purpose was their greatest strength. They were now in a land of rolling hills and thick forests, a landscape that was both familiar and foreign to Caleb. He was a man of the high mountains, but this land, with its quiet beauty and its gentle rhythms, was beginning to feel like home. One afternoon, as they were resting by a cool, clear river, Naia showed Caleb something. She had found a small, smooth stone, a beautiful, translucent green. She took a small piece of sinew and began to work, her hands moving with a practiced grace. She was making a small amulet, a protective charm. "My people, we believe in the power of the land," she said, her voice soft. "This stone, it is from the heart of the earth. It will protect us." Caleb watched her, a small, gentle smile on his face. He was a man of logic, a man who believed in the tangible. He had no faith in magic, no belief in spirits, but he saw the faith in her eyes, the quiet belief in a world he could not see, and he found himself believing too. He was learning to trust not just in the strength of her body, but in the strength of her spirit. He reached out and took the stone from her. It was cool and smooth against his skin. "It is beautiful," he said. "It is for you," she said, her voice a whisper, "to keep you safe, to remind you that you are a part of a family now. You are not alone." He was quiet for a long moment. He had never been given a gift like this before. It was a gesture of love, a symbol of trust. He took the sinew and tied it around his neck, the stone resting against his chest. It felt heavy, a comforting weight. He reached out and took her hand. "Naia," he said, his voice a low rumble. I have something for you." He took a small carved wooden horse from his saddlebag. It was the toy Tallow had given him, the one he had been clutching when Caleb found him. He had carved it from a piece of juniper, his rough hands working with a craftsman's precision. "It is for Tallow," he said, "to remind him of his father, and of you, and of me." She took the horse, her eyes filling with tears. "You did this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He nodded. "I did." She reached out and kissed him, a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of gratitude, of love, of a future filled with hope. The past was a heavy burden, but they were not defined by it. They were defined by the present, by the trust they had found in each other. They were a family, and they were building a home, not just with wood and stone, but with trust, with love, and with a shared sense of purpose. The healing power of trust had begun to mend their broken hearts. The weeks that followed were a journey of quiet discovery. They had left the dangers of the plains behind them, and they were now in the heart of a new land, a land that was both beautiful and forgiving. They were a family, and they were building a life, a future, a home together. One evening they were sitting around the fire, their bellies full of roasted fish and berries. The boys were asleep, their small bodies a testament to the peace they had found. The moon was a silver crescent in the sky, and the stars were a brilliant canopy overhead. The air was filled with the sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Caleb looked at Naia, at the firelight dancing on her face. He saw the strength in her eyes, the grace in her hands, the quiet dignity in her posture. He was a man who had lived his life alone, a man who had run from his past. But now he had a future. He had a family. He had a reason to live. He reached out and took her hand. "Naia," he said, his voice low and serious, "I have to ask you something." She looked at him, her eyes wide. She knew what he was going to say. Her heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic drum against her ribs. "I have no home," he said, "but I can build one. I have no family, but I have you, and I have the boys, and I have a question to ask you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw, honest love. "I know this isn't a world of magic or of fairy tales. This is a world of hardship and of danger, but I want to face it with you. I want to build a life with you. I want to be a father to your sons." He took a deep breath. "I need love, and you need a father for your sons." He held her gaze, a silent question in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" She was quiet for a long moment. She had been a victim, a woman who had lost everything, but now she was a survivor. She was a woman who had found a man who saw her not as a savage, but as a woman of strength and of grace. A man who saw her sons not as a burden, but as a gift. She looked at him, at his rough hands, at his kind eyes, and she felt a surge of love so strong it took her breath away. She had lost so much, but she had found so much more. She had found a partner, a protector, a man who saw her for who she truly was. She had found a home, not in a place, but in a person. "Yes," she said, her voice a whisper, filled with a raw, fierce love. "Yes, Hawk, I will marry you." He pulled her into a tight embrace, and he held her for a long time, the two of them a small, warm knot of happiness in the vast, cold night. The past was a ghost, a shadow in the distance, but the future was a promise, a beacon of hope. They were a family, and they were building a life, a future, a home, together. The proposal was not just a question, but a vow. A vow to love, to cherish, and to protect. A vow to build a family and to make it their own. The joy of their engagement, while real and profound, was a fragile thing, a beautiful bubble of happiness that seemed to hover precariously, threatening to burst at the slightest touch. In the quiet moments, a shared glance, a hand held by the firelight, Caleb and Naia felt a powerful and undeniable connection. They were a world unto themselves, sealed in their newfound love and the hope for a future. But the past, as they had learned with every desperate turn and every mile on the trail, had a way of catching up. They were building a new life, a new home, and a new future together. Yet the ghosts of their pasts were still there, lingering just out of sight in the shadows of the high desert. One afternoon, their quest for a perfect building site led them to a small, abandoned homestead tucked away in a remote valley. It was a place heavy with a palpable sadness. The cabin stood as a monument to sorrow, its walls of hewn timber old and weathered, a testament to a family's dreams turned to dust. The porch was a collection of rotting planks, soft and spongy underfoot, and the roof had caved in on one side, leaving the interior exposed to the elements. A choked-out garden plot overgrown with thorny weeds and dry brambles surrounded the home, a silent elegy to lost hope. Caleb dismounted, a solemn expression on his face, his gaze sweeping over the desolate scene. His eyes, accustomed to seeing potential in the wild, now saw a different kind of challenge. He saw a place that had died, but he also saw a place that could be reborn. "This is it," he said, his voice low and firm, a whisper of a promise in the heavy air. "This is where we'll build our home." Naia walked toward him, her footsteps light and respectful. Her eyes, filled with a primal, intuitive sense of the land, saw more than just a ruined cabin. She saw the pain and loss that clung to the place. "It is a sad place, my Hawk," she said, her voice soft with a deep, quiet reverence. "A place of ghosts, of broken dreams." "Then we will bring it back to life," he said, his voice firm, his jaw set with a grim resolve. "We will build a new home, a new life, a new beginning on the bones of the old one. We will honor the past, the family that lived here, but we will not be defined by it. We will fill this place with life and laughter, and we will drive the ghosts away." And so they began to work. Their hands became a blur of motion, a silent, powerful symphony of hope and labor. They toiled from sunup to sundown, their efforts a testament to their shared purpose. Caleb, with his immense strength and knowledge of carpentry, began the heavy work of repairing the cabin's foundation and raising new beams. Naia, with her deep understanding of the earth, cleared the overgrown land, her hands moving with a practiced grace as she pulled weeds and tilled the stubborn soil. They worked side by side, a perfect partnership. The sweat, the blisters, the small victories of each repaired wall and each newly laid roof beam all became a physical metaphor for their relationship. They were not just rebuilding a cabin, they were building something strong and lasting, a bond forged in shared toil and a common dream. But even as they worked, the past was still there, a constant nagging whisper in the back of Caleb's mind. He had left his past behind, walking away from his family, his home, and even his own name. He was a new man, a man of the mountains, a man with a new family, a man called Hawk by the woman who had captured his heart. But the man he had been was still there, a ghost in the shadows, a spectre of a life he had failed to save. One evening, as they sat by the fire, its light a warm, comforting presence against the vast cold night, he found himself telling Naia about his past. The words, once so tightly locked away, now came tumbling out. He spoke of his family, of his father's gruff love, of his mother's quiet strength. He spoke of the terrible fever that had swept through their farm, taking first his little sister, then his mother, leaving behind a silence so vast it felt like a living thing. He spoke of the bad luck that had followed, the crop failure, the livestock plague, the feeling of a curse that had hounded him until he had fled, walking away from it all and never looking back. Naia listened, her hand in his, her stillness a powerful act of empathy. She didn't offer platitudes or empty words of comfort, for she knew they were useless against such deep pain. She simply listened, her eyes filled with a bottomless well of understanding. In that listening, in the quiet intimacy of the night, a new level of trust was forged between them. She had her own ghosts, her own shadows, the memory of her lost family, the brutal violence that had shattered her people's world. But she had faced them, and she had survived. She was a living testament to the power of resilience, a woman who knew that even after the deepest sorrow, life could begin again. "We cannot run from our past, my love," she said, her voice soft as a falling leaf. "It is a part of who we are. It has made us strong, it has made us who we are today. But we can learn from it. We can choose to build a new future, a future that is not defined by our past, but by our hope. This place, the people who lost their dreams here, we honor them by creating our own. We will give this place a new story." She was right. The past was a heavy burden, a weight that had threatened to crush them, but they were not alone in carrying it. They had each other. They were a family, and they were facing the world together. The unsettling past was a constant whisper in the wind, a lingering sadness in the corners of the land they now called home, but they were not listening to the whispers of sorrow. They were listening to the hammers and the saws, the shared laughter, the quiet rhythm of their combined efforts. They were listening to the whispers of a new life, a new beginning, a new home, a new family. The homestead was slowly but surely coming to life, transformed by their labor and love. The dilapidated cabin was now a sturdy, warm home, its newly laid roof holding firm against the unpredictable desert weather. The land, which had been choked with weeds and brambles, was now a small, tidy garden, its freshly turned soil promising a bounty of sustenance. It was a place of hope, a sanctuary where the ghosts of the past could not intrude, a place of new beginnings built on a foundation of shared strength. But the old world, a world of violence, of grudges, and of ruthless men, had a way of intruding on the new. One afternoon, as Caleb and Naia were working in the garden, their backs to the plains, a lone rider approached. The sound of a single horse's hooves was a subtle change in the rhythm of the day, a disruption in the peaceful symphony of their labor. Caleb's head snapped up, his body instantly tensing, the peaceful feeling of the afternoon evaporating like mist. His hand instinctively went to the pistol holstered at his hip, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of a second rider or a third. The man on the horse was an old man, a grizzled trapper with a face like a road map of wrinkles etched by years of sun and wind. His posture was weary, his shoulders slumped, and his horse limped with every step. Caleb lowered his hand, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew him. His name was Jed, an old trapper he had crossed paths with many times in the high mountains. Jed was a man of the wild, a man who lived by his own rules, a decent man in a world that often rewarded cruelty. "Caleb," Jed said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he reined in his horse, a cloud of dust settling around his feet. "I heard you were back, heard you'd settled down." His weary eyes, though filled with a mixture of curiosity and a strange, quiet respect, darted from Caleb to Naia and the boys, who had stopped their work and were watching with cautious eyes. "Jed," Caleb said, his voice gruff, his guard still up. He was not used to visitors, especially not ones who had traveled so far. "What are you doing so far south? I thought you were happy in the North Country." "Came to get some supplies," Jed said, his gaze returning to Caleb, a serious look on his face. "Heard the trading post was doing good business. Saw some of your old friends from the mountains while I was there. They were looking for you. Asked about you a lot." Caleb's heart, which had just begun to settle, sank like a stone in a well. A cold dread spread through him, instantly banishing the peaceful rhythm of the afternoon. The name he had not spoken aloud in months, the name he had tried to bury in his past, came back with a vengeance. Red Jack. He hadn't forgotten. He was a ghost from Caleb's past, a man who held a grudge like a viper, a man who reveled in violence and cruelty. He was a symbol of a life Caleb had left behind, a life of solitude and constant peril. "They still looking?" Caleb asked, his voice low, his hand unconsciously tightening around his pistol's grip. "They are," Jed said, his eyes meeting Caleb's with a grim seriousness. "They're a bad lot, Caleb. They're looking for more than just you. They're looking for trouble. And you got a family now. They'll be looking for you." He looked at Naia, at her small, fragile beauty, then to the boys, their innocence a stark contrast to the darkness he spoke of. "They know you're not alone anymore, Caleb. They'll be looking for her. They'll be looking for them." Caleb's jaw tightened, a muscle in his cheek twitching with a cold fury. He had faced down Red Jack before, a man-to-man fight. He had survived. He would do it again, and he would win. But this time the stakes were infinitely higher. He wasn't fighting for his own life. He was fighting for the lives of his family, for the people who had brought him out of his self-imposed darkness. He was a protector now, a father, a husband, a man with a reason to live and a reason to fight with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed. "I'll be ready," Caleb said, his voice a low growl, filled with a primal protective power. Jed nodded, his face etched with a mix of respect and sorrow. "I know you will. You're a good man, Caleb. A good man with a good family. Don't let them take that from you." With a final weary nod, he turned his horse and rode away, a lone figure in the vast open plains, leaving behind him a stark, unsettling silence. The old world had intruded on the new. The past was not just a memory, a ghost in the shadows. It was a living, breathing threat riding on the back of a grudge. Red Jack was a symbol of a life Caleb had left behind, a life of violence and of solitude. But Caleb was not that man anymore. He was a father. He was a husband. He was a protector. He was a man who had found a reason to live, a reason to fight. The path to their new life had not been a straight one, and it was not yet safe. He looked at Naia, at the love and fear in her eyes, and he knew what he had to do. He would not run. He would not hide. He would face Red Jack and the darkness he represented, and he would win. He would not let the past destroy the future. He would stand his ground, and he would fight for his family, and he would build a new life, a new home, a new future, on the bones of the old one. The old world had come to meet the new, and Caleb, a man transformed, was ready for the fight. The threat of Red Jack and his lingering, vengeful men hung over them like a dark, oppressive cloud, a storm front on the horizon that Caleb knew was not merely approaching, but inevitable. It was no longer a question of if they would come, but when, and with what cruel intent. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a branch, every shift in the wind's direction sent a jolt of ice through Caleb's veins, sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. He spent his days in a relentless cycle of preparation, his mind a constant, churning whirl of plans and contingencies, each scenario meticulously played out, each weakness of the homestead meticulously shored up. He transformed their budding home into a veritable fortress. The simple log cabin, once a symbol of peace, now bristled with a grim readiness. He reinforced the outer walls with additional timber, creating narrow firing slits that allowed observation without exposure. Around the perimeter, he dug shallow camouflage ditches and strategically placed tripwires, cunningly designed to alert them to any unseen approach. A robust 6-foot-tall fence, woven from thick, thorny branches and sharpened stakes, now encircled the immediate dwelling, an imposing barrier against both man and beast. Beyond that, he fashioned a small, sturdy barricade near the most vulnerable approach, a place where he could make his initial stand. Every loose stone, every uneven patch of ground, every gnarled root was either incorporated into their defense or painstakingly cleared to avoid a misstep in the heat of battle. He was a man of the mountains, a man who knew how to survive when the odds were stacked against him, and he would use every ounce of his ingrained skill, every trick he'd ever learned, to protect his precious family. His old life as a lone trapper had been about protecting his own skin. This new life was about safeguarding everything he held dear. Naia was a quiet, constant presence beside him, her unwavering gaze often following his movements, understanding without a single word the weight of his burden. She worked without complaint, her hands moving with a purpose born of a lifetime of resilience, a deep-seated knowledge of survival that mirrored his own. While Caleb focused on the physical defenses, Naia tended to the less tangible yet equally vital aspects of their readiness. She sharpened knives and gathered medicinal herbs, preparing poultices and bandages, her foresight a comforting counterpoint to his stark practicality. She was a woman who had faced death head-on and had not only come out on the other side, but had emerged with a strength that was both fierce and serene. She was a warrior in her own right, her spirit unbent, her resolve unyielding. The boys, Tallow and Kale, were a poignant source of strength, a constant vivid reminder of what they were fighting for. Their innocent laughter, though muted now by the pervading tension, was the purest sound in their little world. They were growing stronger, adapting to the harsh realities with an astonishing, heartbreaking swiftness. Their faces, once etched with fear and loss, were now filled with a newfound joy and curiosity, even amidst the grim preparations. Tallow, with his quiet intensity, shadowed Caleb, learning to load the rifle, to distinguish the sounds of the wind from the sounds of an approaching enemy. Kyle, still small and less understanding of the immediate danger, often clung to Naia, finding comfort in her steady presence. They were a living testament to the hope that had been born in this new, precarious land, in this fragile yet fiercely united family. One evening, as the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky and the first stars began to pierce the twilight, they were sitting around the fire, its flames casting flickering shadows that danced across their worried faces. Caleb looked at Naia, his heart heavy with a terrible decision he felt compelled to make. "I want you to take the boys and go," he said, his voice low and urgent, laced with a desperation he rarely allowed himself to show. "Go to the trading post. Elias will protect you. He owes me. I'll stay here, I'll face them. I won't let them get you, I can hold them off long enough for you to get away." She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering determination that brooked no argument. Her hand reached out, strong and steady, to grip his. "No," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for discussion. "We are a family. We fight together. I will not leave you. My sons, they will not leave you. We faced death together once. We will face it again as one." Her conviction was absolute, a rock against the storm of his fear for them. He was quiet for a moment, looking into the depths of her eyes, and he knew he couldn't convince her. He had seen the fierce loyalty there, the unbreakable love that had bound them together. She was right, they were a family. They would face this together, come what may. They spent the next few days in a state of quiet, agonizing tension. Every shadow became a potential threat, every gust of wind a false alarm. Their ears were perpetually perked, straining for the telltale sound of approaching riders, the distant thud of hooves on dry earth. The homestead, once a collection of simple structures, was now a true fortress, a small, fragile bastion against a world intent on violence and hatred. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts, punctuated by Caleb's restless patrols and Naia's quiet vigilance. Even the boys, sensing the gravity in the air, spoke in hushed tones, their play subdued. Then, one afternoon, the inevitable happened. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge on the horizon grew, thickening and darkening against the pale blue sky. A cloud of dust followed by the dark, distinct forms of men on horseback. Red Jack and his men. They were coming for him, and more terrifyingly, they were coming for his family. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against the silence of the vast plains. He was not afraid for himself. That fear had been burned out of him years ago in 100 solitary scrapes. He was a man of the mountains, a man who had faced death many times and emerged victorious. But this time he was not alone. He had a family to protect, a life to defend, a future to secure. He had a reason to live, a reason more powerful than any he had ever known. He took his rifle, its familiar weight a comfort in his hands, and walked to the edge of the homestead, positioning himself behind the strongest part of the barricade. He stood there, a silent sentinel, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders, his body a solid wall of defiance. Naia came and stood beside him, her hand finding his, her touch a silent anchor. The boys, Tallow and Kale, stood a few paces behind them, hidden but watching, their small hands clasped tightly together, drawing strength from their parents' unwavering resolve. The men were getting closer now, close enough for Caleb to distinguish Red Jack's face, a mask of grim, malevolent determination. He was a man who held a grudge like a viper, a man who had no honor, no empathy, no redeeming quality. He was a ghost from Caleb's brutal past, a specter intent on destroying the fragile future Caleb had so painstakingly built. Caleb raised his rifle, the cold steel a natural extension of his will, and he took aim. He was ready for the fight. He was ready to protect his family. He was a silent sentinel, a protector, a warrior. He was a man who had found his purpose, a man who had found his home, a man who had found his family. And he was not going to let them take it from him. Not a single breath. The wind, which had been a quiet, almost mournful companion for so long, now howled across the plains like a banshee, carrying with it the gritty dust churned up by the thunderous approach of the riders. Caleb stood his ground, a silent, unmoving figure etched against the vast, indifferent horizon, his posture radiating an unwavering defiance. There was no fear in his heart, no tremor of doubt in his hands, only a quiet, resolute fury, a burning protectiveness that consumed all other emotions. He had found a new life, a new family, a reason to fight and live, and he would not, under any circumstance, allow it to be torn from him by the ghosts of his brutal past. He watched with narrowed, determined eyes as Red Jack and his men rode closer, their faces a mixture of hate, greed, and a predatory determination that sent a shiver down the spine. They were a motley crew, a collection of hardened outlaws and desperate vagrants, their tattered clothes and grimy faces reflecting the harsh lives they led, but they were armed and dangerous, their intentions as clear as the high desert sun. Naia stood steadfastly beside him, her hand gripping his with a fierce, unwavering strength that mirrored his own resolve. Her face, usually serene, was now a mask of fierce concentration, her dark eyes fixed on the approaching threat, radiating a quiet, ancient defiance. Her sons, Tallow and Kyle, were a few paces behind them, safely hidden behind the crude but effective barricade Caleb had built from salvaged timber and sharpened branches. They were watching, their young eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, their small bodies trembling slightly. They had seen their mother's quiet strength, their father's unwavering courage, and in their innocent hearts, they understood what was at stake. This was not just a fight for a piece of land, it was a battle for their very existence, for the fragile haven they had carved out of the wilderness. Red Jack, astride a lean, dark horse, reined in sharply, kicking up a plume of dust. A cruel sneer twisted his lips, stretching the scar that ran from his eyebrow to his chin. "Well, well, look what we have here," he drawled, his voice a low, venomous growl that carried on the wind. "The mighty mountain man, all cozy with his little family of savages. What's the matter, Caleb? Did you finally get tired of living alone? Did you need a squaw to warm your bed and some half-breed brats to fill your empty cabin?" His eyes, cold and dead, raked over Naia, lingering with a possessive, hateful glint. Caleb's jaw was set, a grim, unyielding line, a stark contrast to Red Jack's mocking grin. "This is my home, Red Jack," he said, his voice a low rumble, resonating with an authority that left no room for doubt. "And these are my family. You turn around and leave now and there won't be any trouble. This is your only warning." His finger hovered near the trigger of his rifle, a silent promise of swift retribution. "Trouble? Oh, we ain't looking for trouble, Caleb," Red Jack sneered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "We're looking for justice. You stole from us, boy. You took what was ours and you killed our brothers." He conveniently omitted the fact that their brothers had been violent outlaws. He then gestured dismissively to Naia and the boys with a flick of his wrist. "That savage woman and her brats. They're ours to take, payment for your transgressions. We'll show them what happens when a white man tries to keep what don't belong to him." Naia's grip on Caleb's hand tightened almost painfully, a silent communication of her fury and resolve. "We are not yours," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through Red Jack's arrogant bluster. "We are free. We are a family. You have no claim on us." Her words, though few, carried the weight of generations of her people's unbroken spirit. Red Jack let out a harsh, grating laugh, devoid of any genuine mirth. "Family? A squaw and 2 half-breed brats? Don't make me laugh, Caleb. This ain't no family. This is a mess, a stain on these lands, and we're here to clean it up one way or another." He raised his pistol, a heavy, worn Colt, the barrel glinting cruelly in the harsh sunlight. "Now, you give them to us, and we'll let you live. You can go back to your lonely mountain hole just like before. No harm done to you personally." Caleb's eyes, which had been a cold, steady blue, now blazed with a fierce, primal rage, a fire ignited by Red Jack's vile words and the threat to his loved ones. He was a man who had lived his life alone, a man who had run from his past, choosing solitude over the pain of connection. But now he had a family to protect, a future to fight for, and a love that made him utterly fearless. "You'll have to kill me first," he said, his voice a low growl filled with a raw, savage power that echoed across the quiet plains, leaving no room for negotiation. Red Jack's sneer twisted into a look of cold, calculating fury. He snapped his wrist, firing a quick, precise shot that hit Caleb in the left shoulder. The force of the bullet, a brutal, physical blow, sent him stumbling back a step, a sharp gasp of pain escaping his lips as the heat of the impact spread through him. Naia cried out, a guttural sound of terror and anguish, her hand flying instinctively to his wound, her fingers immediately stained crimson. "Caleb!" she screamed, her voice a mixture of terror and anguish, her eyes wide with shock and fear. He clutched his shoulder, the pain a hot, searing flame that threatened to engulf him, but he did not fall. The ground swayed beneath him, his vision blurred for a split second, but the sight of Naia's terrified face, the image of his boys hidden behind the barricade, solidified his resolve. He looked at Red Jack, at the triumphant smirk that had replaced the fury on his face, and a new wave of unadulterated rage washed over him, clearing his mind of pain. He had been a solitary man, a man who had lived and died by his own harsh rules, but now he was a protector, a warrior, a man who would die and kill for his family without a second thought. He raised his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate, each motion a testament to his sheer willpower over his pain. He sighted down the barrel, ignoring the burning agony in his shoulder, focusing only on Red Jack's sneering face. He fired. The shot was a blur of motion, a flash of fire and a cloud of acrid smoke. It hit Red Jack square in the chest, the heavy slug tearing through him with brutal force. The impact sent the outlaw leader tumbling from his horse, a look of shocked surprise freezing on his face, his eyes wide and vacant as he hit the ground with a sickening final thud. The other men, momentarily stunned and horrified by their leader's sudden, brutal death, hesitated, their bravado evaporating in an instant. They had been prepared for a fight, for a gunfight with a lone mountain man, perhaps even a skirmish with a few. They had not been prepared for a man who would kill without hesitation, without remorse, for the family he so fiercely protected. They looked at Caleb, at the cold, determined resolve in his eyes, at the blood seeping through his shirt, and they knew they had met their match. Their fight wasn't worth the cost. One of them yelled a panicked command, and they turned their horses in unison, riding away in a chaotic scramble, leaving their fallen leader to the dust and the vultures. Caleb stood there, swaying slightly, his body trembling with exhaustion and the searing agony of his wound, but also with an undeniable sense of triumph. He had won. He had faced his ghosts, the brutal reminders of a past he'd tried to outrun, and he had emerged victorious, his family safe. But the price was a wound, a deep, painful one, a constant nagging reminder of the past's relentless pursuit. Naia, her initial terror now replaced by a fierce determination, rushed to his side, her hands a blur of motion as she tore strips of cloth from her own dress to tend to his bleeding shoulder. The boys, Tallow and Kale, slowly emerged from behind the barricade, their faces filled with a mixture of immense relief and lingering fear, their eyes fixed on their wounded father. They were safe. The immediate danger had passed, leaving behind only the eerie silence of the plains. But the memory of the fight, the echo of the gunshots, the image of Red Jack falling, and the fresh wound on Caleb's shoulder was still there, a constant presence, a visceral reminder of what they had lost and, more profoundly, of what they had won. They were a family, forged in fire and blood, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future. But the past, as they had learned, would always be a part of their story, a jagged scar serving as a testament to their enduring love and resilience. The days that followed the battle were a blur of pain, punctuated by moments of quiet, arduous healing. Caleb's wound was deep, a constant throbbing ache that radiated through his left side, making every movement a slow, agonizing ordeal. Even the simplest tasks, lifting a cup of water, shifting in his bed of furs, sent spasms of fire through his shoulder. He was a man who had survived 100 battles, countless scrapes with death in the wilderness, but this one had left a particular mark, not just on his flesh but on his spirit. It was not merely a physical wound, it was a mental one, a constant searing reminder of the price of his new life, the ever-present danger that shadowed their fragile happiness. The victory over Red Jack had been sweet, but its cost was etched into his very being. Naia was a constant, unwavering presence beside him, her devotion a quiet, steady flame in the dim cabin. Her hands, nimble and sure, were a blur of motion as she tended to his wound, cleaning it meticulously with boiled water, and the last drops of the alcohol Caleb kept for emergencies. She applied poultices made from finely crushed herbs, sage, yarrow, and other remedies whispered down through generations of her people, the scent of them filling the small cabin with an earthy, medicinal aroma. Her voice, a soft, soothing melody, often filled the silence as she told him stories of her people. Ancient tales of healing and resilience, weaving a tapestry of comfort around his pain. She was not just a healer of the body, she was a healer of the soul, a woman who possessed a deep, primal knowledge of the land and of its restorative power. She used her inherited wisdom not only to mend his physical injuries, but also to soothe his restless, troubled spirit. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent, casting a golden, ethereal glow over the rugged land outside, Naia sat beside him. Her hand, cool and gentle, found his, her fingers tangling with his calloused ones. "You are strong, Caleb," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper, filled with a deep understanding. "Stronger than most men I have known. But you are also broken. You have been fighting for so long, carrying so much burden. It is time to rest, my hawk." "I can't rest," he rasped, his voice a low growl, filled with a restless, impatient energy that clawed at him from within. His body ached for action, his mind chafed at the forced stillness. "I have to finish our home. I have to build our future. There's still so much to do, so many dangers out there." His eyes, though weary, were filled with a frantic, unyielding determination. He still saw the shadows of Red Jack, the specters of his past, looming over their future. "The future is in the doing, not in the building," she said, her voice soft but firm, a quiet conviction that resonated deep within him. "The future is in the moments. In the moments we share, in the moments we have right now sitting here by this fire with our sons safe nearby. The future is now, Caleb. It is here." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "You have been so focused on what might come, on protecting us from every shadow, that you are missing the light that is already here." He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her face, framed by dark, unbound hair, was filled with a deep, unwavering love and a profound wisdom that seemed to stretch beyond her years. He saw the truth in her words, a truth so simple yet so profound that it pierced through the fog of his pain and his anxiety. He had been so consumed by the need to build a new life, to shield them from every possible danger, that he had forgotten to truly live in the present, to fully embrace the precious moments he had with his newfound family. He had been so focused on protecting them that he had inadvertently distanced himself, becoming a sentinel rather than a participant in their joy. He reached out and took her hands, his fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined with hers. "I'm sorry, Naia," he said, his voice a whisper, filled with a raw, honest humility he hadn't known he possessed. "I have been so focused on the past, on the ghosts that haunt me, that I have forgotten to truly live in the present. I've been afraid of losing what I've found, so afraid I almost didn't see it right in front of me." "The past is a part of us, my love," she affirmed, her thumb gently stroking the back of his hand. "But it does not define us. It has shaped us, yes, but it does not control us. We are defined by our love. We are defined by our hope. We are defined by our family, by the choices we make now." She paused, her gaze sweeping over their small, warm cabin, then back to his eyes. "You saved us, Caleb. You brought us to this place. Now let us help you heal, too. We are here, all of us." He was quiet for a long moment, the quiet stretching between them filled with the crackle of the fire and the soft, distant sounds of the night. He looked towards the corner where the boys, Tallow and Kale, slept peacefully, their small bodies a testament to the hope and purpose he had found. They were his future. They were his reason for living. They were his family, and they needed him whole not just as a protector but as a presence. He turned back to Naia, his eyes, no longer clouded by pain or shadowed by the past, filled with a new, unwavering determination that shone with clarity. "I vow to you, Naia," he said, his voice a low rumble, stronger now, imbued with a profound certainty. "I will not let the past define me. I will not let the ghosts win. I will finish building us this home, yes, but more importantly, I will build a future, a life, a true family with you and the boys. I will be the man you deserve. I will be the father the boys need. I will learn to live in the light you have brought to my life." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her entire face, erasing the lingering weariness and replacing it with pure, unadulterated joy. "You already are, my hawk," she said, her voice a whisper, filled with a raw, fierce love that pulsed between them. "You already are." The vow was more than just words. It was a new beginning, a promise of profound healing, a commitment to a future filled with hope and presence. They were a family, and they were mending not just their bodies from the wounds of the world, but their souls from the scars of the past. They were healing and they were growing, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future together, one cherished present moment at a time. As Caleb's strength returned, a new and deeper purpose settled into his bones. His body, once a vessel for a solitary life of survival, now felt like an instrument of a greater goal. The homestead, which had been a symbol of their new life and a testament to their resilience against the world's harshness, now felt like just the beginning. It was not enough to simply build walls and a roof. They had to root themselves in the land, to honor the earth that had given them refuge and the past that had brought them together. Naia, with her deep, primal knowledge of the land, led them on a trek beyond the homestead. Her gait was silent and knowing, a stark contrast to Caleb's deliberate, heavy steps. He followed her, and the boys followed him, their small feet making soft sounds on the forest floor. She led them through sun-dappled groves of ancient trees, their gnarled roots like old men's hands gripping the earth. The air grew cooler, and the scent of pine and damp earth intensified. She led them to a sacred place, a place of power and history that whispered stories of generations past. It was a place of quiet, breathtaking beauty, a small, secluded waterfall cascaded over mossy rocks, its water a crystalline sheet that fell into a pool so clear you could see the smooth stones at the bottom. This was a place of peace, a sanctuary that felt older than time itself. Naia sat on a smooth rock, and Caleb and the boys gathered around her. She began to tell them stories of her people, not the stories of war and sadness, but of creation and life. She spoke of White-Painted Woman, the creator goddess of her people, who had walked the earth and brought life to the sacred mountains. Her voice was a soft, melodic song that wove together tales of the sun, the moon, and the ceremonies that honored the land and its life-giving power. She was not just a storyteller. She was a teacher, a guide, a woman who was passing down the knowledge of her people to a new family, a family that was a fusion of two worlds. The boys listened, their faces rapt with attention, their young minds absorbing every word. Caleb listened too, his mind open in a way it had never been before. He was a man of logic, a man who had no faith in magic or spirits, a man who believed only in what he could see, touch and feel. But as he watched Naia, as he heard her gentle voice and saw the quiet, unwavering belief in her eyes, he found himself believing too. He was learning to trust not just in the strength of her body, but in the strength of her spirit, in the unseen power that connected her to the earth and to her ancestors. He realized that the world he knew was only a part of a much larger, more mysterious whole, and that Naia held the key to understanding it. One afternoon, as they sat by the waterfall, the sounds of cascading water and birdsong filling the air, Naia took a piece of rawhide and a few beads from a small pouch. Her hands, which had mended Caleb's wounds and soothed his troubled soul, moved with a practiced grace as she began to work. She was making a small, beautiful pouch, a protective charm, woven with intricate patterns. "This is for our home," she said, her voice as soft as the water's mist. "It will protect us from the ghosts of the past. It will keep the bad spirits away. It will make our home a place of peace." Caleb watched her, a small, gentle smile on his face. He reached out and took her hands, his fingers tangling with hers. The beads were cool against his skin, and the rawhide was rough, but her touch was warm and filled with an undeniable love. "Naia," he said, his voice a low, emotional rumble. "You have already made our home a place of peace. You have already driven the ghosts away." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her entire face, making her eyes shine like the stars. "You have helped me too," she said, her voice a whisper filled with a raw, fierce love. "You have given me a new life, a new family. You have given me a home, not of wood and stone, but of love and safety." Their hearts, once scarred and solitary, were now entwined. They were no longer just a man and a woman, but a family, and they were mending not just their bodies, but their souls. They were healing and growing, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future, together. The sacred ground was not just a place of power and history, but a place of new beginnings, where the old world met the new, and where a new family was born, a family that was a perfect blend of two different cultures, two different histories, and two different souls. The homestead was now more than just a home, it was a sanctuary forged from love and resilience. The days were filled with the simple, profound rhythms of life, the sound of Caleb's axe as he split wood, the cheerful chatter of the boys as they played by the creek, and the soft, soothing melody of Naia's voice as she wove baskets and told stories. Caleb was a man transformed. He was still a trapper, a hunter, a mountain man, but he was also a father, a husband, a man who had found his purpose in the warmth of a family he never thought he'd have. But the past, as they had learned, had a way of catching up with them, even in their remote haven. One afternoon, as they were working in the garden, planting seeds of hope in the fertile soil, a lone rider approached. The sight of a stranger, even one riding alone, sent a jolt of alarm through Caleb. He reached for his rifle, his body instantly tensing, ready for a fight. But as the man drew closer, Caleb recognized him. It was Jed, the grizzled trapper with a face like a road map of wrinkles. Jed's horse was weary, its head hanging low, and his own posture was slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. Caleb's heart, which had been pounding with a primal readiness for battle, now sank with a heavy sense of dread. The man who had unknowingly betrayed their location had returned. "Jed," Caleb said, his voice low and serious, a mixture of caution and concern. "What are you doing here?" Jed dismounted, his face a mask of weary sorrow. He didn't meet Caleb's eyes at first, his gaze fixed on the dirt. "I came to tell you something, Caleb," he said, his voice a low, tired rumble, each word heavy with remorse. "I came to tell you, I'm sorry." Caleb's surprise was clear on his face. He had expected an apology, perhaps, but not this raw, heartfelt admission. "Sorry for what?" he asked, his voice softer now, his rifle lowered. Jed finally looked up, his eyes, old and tired, filled with shame. I told them where you were, Caleb," he said, his voice a whisper, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I told them about you, about Naia, about the boys. I didn't know they were so bad. I didn't know they would hurt you. I'm sorry. I swear I didn't know they'd ride out here to do you harm." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, the confession hanging in the air between them. He looked at Jed, at the genuine shame in his eyes, at the sorrow etched onto his face. He saw not a man who had maliciously betrayed him, but a man who had made a terrible mistake, a man who was living with the consequences of his actions. Jed's act, born of carelessness rather than malice, had almost cost Caleb everything. The bullet hole in his shoulder was a constant, painful reminder of the price he had paid. Caleb looked at Naia, and she nodded, her eyes filled with a deep, quiet wisdom that surpassed his own. She understood the weight of a mistake. "He is a man with a good heart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He made a mistake, we all do. The path to wisdom is paved with mistakes." Her words were a balm, a gentle reminder that they too had been on a long, arduous path, and that their survival was a testament to more than just strength. It was a testament to grace. Caleb took a deep breath. He had been betrayed, but he had also found forgiveness. He had been wronged, but he had also found a new life, a new family. He had been hurt, but he had also found a love so profound it healed the deepest wounds. He reached out and put his hand on Jed's shoulder. The contact was a physical representation of his forgiveness. "Jed," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, filled with a compassion that surprised even himself. "I forgive you. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. You came here. You rode all this way to tell me the truth. You are a good man." Jed's eyes filled with a raw, honest gratitude, and he let out a shuddering breath, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you, Caleb," he said, his voice a whisper, thick with emotion. "Thank you. I'll never forget this." He mounted his horse, and without another word, he rode away, a solitary figure in the distance, but no longer a burdened one. The path to forgiveness was a long and difficult one, a journey that required more courage than any gunfight. It was a path that led to a new beginning, a new future. They were a family, and they were mending not just their bodies but their souls. They were healing, and they were growing, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future, together. A future where forgiveness was as vital as food and water. The homestead was now a bustling, vibrant place, a testament to what love and hard work could build in the wilderness. The days were filled with the sound of laughter echoing from the hills, of the rhythmic thud of Caleb's hammer as he mended fences, and of the quiet, contented moments of shared companionship around the fire. Caleb was a man transformed. He was a trapper, a hunter, a mountain man, but he was also a father, a husband, a man who had finally found his purpose not in solitude, but in the warmth of a family he had built with his own two hands. Naia was a constant, grounding presence beside him. Her hands, once a blur of motion as she tended to their wounds, were now a blur of motion as she tended to their home, her voice a soft, soothing melody as she told the boys stories of her people. She was a healer, a woman who had a deep, primal knowledge of the land and of its power. She was a woman who had lost everything, her family, her home, her past, but she had found so much more. She had found a partner, a protector, a man who saw her for who she truly was, not as a savage, but as a woman of immense grace and strength. She had found a home, not in a place, but in a person. In Caleb's quiet strength, in his unwavering love, she had found her sanctuary. The boys, Talo and Kyle, were a source of immeasurable strength and joy. They were growing stronger with each passing day, their faces filled with a newfound joy that had been absent when Caleb first found them. They were learning to hunt, to track, to survive in the wilderness, learning the ways of their father from a man who had lived his whole life as a mountain man. But they were also learning the ways of their mother, learning to honor the land, to speak the language of their ancestors, to find peace in the old stories. They were a perfect blend of two worlds, two cultures, two histories. They were a testament to the hope that had been born in this new land, in this new family, a testament to the power of love to heal the deepest wounds. One evening, as they were sitting around the fire, the boys finally asleep, the air filled with the quiet chirps of crickets and the scent of pine smoke, Caleb looked at Naia. The firelight danced on her face, illuminating her beautiful, serene features. "I love you, Naia," he said, his voice a low, honest rumble that came from the depths of his soul. "I love you more than I ever thought I could love a woman. You and the boys, you are my family. You are my reason for living." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I love you, Hawk," she said, her voice a whisper, filled with a raw, fierce love that transcended language. "You are my world. You are my home. You are my family." He reached out and took her hands, his fingers tangling with hers. Their hands, a trapper's and a healer's, fit together perfectly. They were a family, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future together. They had faced so many challenges, so many dangers, so many heartbreaks, but they had overcome them all. They had found love. They had found forgiveness. They had found a home. Most importantly, they had found each other. They were a testament to the fact that a family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, and that a home wasn't a place on a map, but a feeling in the heart. The homestead was now more than just a place of quiet peace and abiding love. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of a new beginning. The days were a symphony of life, the rhythmic chop of Caleb's axe, the joyful shouts of Talo and Kale as they played by the creek, and the soft, soothing melody of Naia's songs. Caleb was a man transformed. The solitary trapper, the hardened mountain man, was now a father, a husband, a man who had found his ultimate purpose in the warmth of a family he had built with his own two hands. Naia was a constant, unwavering presence beside him. Her hands, which had once tended to his wounds and soothed his troubled soul, were now a blur of motion as she tended to their home. She was a healer, a woman who possessed a deep, primal knowledge of the land and its power. She had lost everything, her family, her home, her past, but in Caleb's quiet strength and unwavering love, she had found a sanctuary. She had found a partner, a protector, a man who saw her for who she truly was, not as a symbol of a conquered people, but as a woman of immense grace and strength. She had found a home not in a place but in a person. The boys, Talo and Kale, were the living, breathing heart of their new family. They were growing stronger every day, their faces a testament to the newfound joy they had found. They were learning the ways of their father, learning to hunt, to track, to survive in the wilderness, but they were also learning the ways of their mother, learning to honor the land, to speak the language of their ancestors, and to find peace in the ancient stories. They were a perfect blend of two worlds, two cultures, two histories, a living testament to the hope that had been born in this new land. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the mountains, Caleb sat with Naia by the fire. The boys were asleep, their small forms huddled together, their breathing a soft, rhythmic sound. Caleb looked at Naia, the firelight dancing on her face, and he was struck by a profound sense of awe. "I love you, Naia," he said, his voice a low, honest rumble that came from the depths of his soul. "I love you more than I ever thought I could love a woman. You and the boys, you are my family. You are my reason for living." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I love you, Hawk," she said, her voice a whisper, filled with a raw, fierce love that transcended language. "You are my world. You are my home. You are my family." He reached out and took her hands, his fingers tangling with hers. They were a family, and they were building a new life, a new home, a new future, together. They had faced so many challenges, so many dangers, and so much heartbreak. But they had overcome it all. They had found love, they had found forgiveness, and they had found a home. Most importantly, they had found each other. They were a testament to the fact that a family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, and that a home wasn't a place on a map, but a feeling in the heart. The homestead, which had once been a place of solitude, was now a place of family, a place of home, a place of love. The mountains, which had once been a place of loneliness, were now a place of a new family, a new life, a new beginning. The heart of the mountains was no longer a symbol of solitude, but a symbol of home, a place where a new life was born, a new family was forged, and a new future was built, a future filled with love, forgiveness, and hope. They were a family, and they were home.